Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that we may absorb and come to seek you in the spirit of Saint Rose of Lima, the first saint of the Americas. We ask that we may be filled with desire to be your people on our earth and in our society. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, as I said, today is the memorial of Saint Rose of Lima. Saint Rose was the very first saint in the Americas, the very first saint of the Americas, and obviously, therefore, the first female saint in the Americas. Now, this is a Catholic thing, I'll admit. There are people who aren't Catholic who may be listening, but this is a Catholic thing. Her bones are on display in the cathedral in Lima, Peru, along with those of St. Martin de Porres. And I have seen that. That's how I know. So St. Rose was a young woman. She, at a very young age, she wanted to seek the Lord. She died at a young age. She was only 24, and she wanted to seek and be a servant of the Lord. And in fact, she was. My favorite quote from her, and I think of it all the time, especially when things go wrong: if people knew how much their difficulties led them closer to God, they would ask for more of them. That's St. Rose of Lima. And I've told you the story before, but I said that on CNN. And I brought that up because there's a window of St. Rose of Lima in CNN and on CNN. Yeah, right. Sorry, in the Cathedral of the Holy Cross, and they had their cameras there, and I showed them that, and that's it. And, you know, if people understood how much their difficulties led them closer to God, they would ask for more of them. So we are here also on the last day this week that we will hear from the judges. Now, I spoke to you about Gideon yesterday and the day before, but as you know, the readings skip around. So the reason why I filled in with you yesterday of the story of Gideon being chosen to lead that battle with only 300 men is because that wasn't part of the readings that we find this week that'll appear at another time during one of the either 3 years on Sundays or 2 years on weekdays. And but we're still in Judges, and now we're going through a very significant reading. Now, understand something. The Hebrews had an interesting governing system. And it was really, if we would kind of think of it this way, especially here in Massachusetts, we have a pretty good understanding of this. You know, towns have town councils with town meeting members and all that. But then once you get a mayor, you get a specific person, and then you have the city council. So as the town grows, its governing system changes. Well, we're seeing some of that in today's reading, and this is the reading from Gideon, where the people had been led by judges, and it was a group of men who would be the leaders of the people. But you also realize that from the time they left Egypt, the Hebrews were very egalitarian. Okay. In the fact that it certainly wasn't a monarchy, but it was a lot of the people who worked together in service to the Lord. And so they would listen to Moses, who was speaking for the Lord, but it was very egalitarian. And they had also some other prophets who were appointed by the Lord who would also work with Moses and speak for the Lord. And they would have, Moses came to a point where he had to appoint other people to help him deal with the issues in the community that he didn't have time to deal with. And we see that also in the Acts of the Apostles. So we see all that. So this community is now growing, and it is being run by a group of men who are the judges. Well, and this committee? Well, now they're coming to a point where they're asking for a king. And remember, what a king will represent is a political power that will serve as leader of the people, but also authority over the people, which is something they don't have right now. But other countries do have this, and they are working very well, according to the Hebrews, from what they can see. And now they're asking the Lord for a king. And there's a lot that depends on the spirituality of the king for the sake of the people. And the Lord is warning them of this. And it's kind of an interesting perspective for those of us here in the United States, even those of us who are Catholics, because we don't have a king. We don't understand kings. And that's literally true. We know the King of England is, and I'm going to talk more about this on the other side of the break, but that's not part of our culture. We'll talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight. Don't forget to tell others where they can find our program. You can hear us on WEZE 590 AM and WEZEradio.com at midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Friday, Eastern Time. We then podcast the program on your favorite podcast platform and at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also hear us on our parish website, ST for StAnthonyAlston.org. That's StAnthonyAlston.org. And let others know where they can find us and spread the word and subscribe to our podcast. We're back, and we're talking about this whole aspect of now the Hebrews will seek a king. Now, I talked a little bit about the King of England, but how many people know there are other nations that have kings? There is a king of Spain, by the way. There's a few others out there. Now, look at that. I mean, there's no king of France. There's a king of Spain, and several other European countries. I'll leave it at that. And so, but it's something that we as Americans here in the United States don't comprehend. We don't really understand kings. We don't understand the parliamentary system. We don't understand all kinds of things like that. Now, we're on the other side of this with the Hebrews because they are now looking for a king, and what the king will do is he will work politically in the world, but they're still going to need a spiritual power to be their authority. And if the king is not a good disciple of the Lord, then you're going to have this split in their country where you have the political and the spiritual. In a sense, we can see that in a lot of ways in our society today, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But if you understand, here in the United States, we have the separation of church and state. Obviously, that wouldn't have existed in Israel, because you had at the time you had the understanding that these are God's people, God's chosen people, and the king would have to respond. But there would also be those things that are done for political expediency if we're going to focus on the king. So you know this whole story if you know anything about European history, and you probably know more than I do, but you know enough that you have the different monarchs from Europe back in the time before the American Revolution, and even sometime afterwards, when they would, a monarch had to marry another, a royalty would have to marry royalty, and you would have these connections between countries because the royalty of, we'll say, England had a connection through the royal line to the royalty of another country, we'll say France. Although I don't think that would happen. But anyway, and we see all that happening all around. Well, a lot of that was also this political expediency. Well, what happens with the Hebrews is they are warned, and granted, this is all before this would be happening, but they are warned not to get lost in that, and that if they bring a king on board, then that king has the ultimate authority. And that's an issue. That king has the ultimate authority. And therefore, now they have to listen to the king. And that king has that authority to do whatever the king has the authority to do. And we can see that clearly with King David, who obviously is the second king of Israel. But I always like to remind my parishioners that King David defined the term kill the messenger. You see it several times in the book of Kings, where King David would just go, why did you tell me this? Bam. There's the famous story, speaking of kings, is when the Amalekite, I believe it's Amalekite, killed Saul, the king, the first king of Israel, because Saul asked him to kill him because he was suffering so much. And then that same man had to go inform David that Saul was dead and that he, as the term is used, dispatched him. And David killed him. He killed the messenger, killed him right away because he said, by your own words, you killed the Lord's anointed. Even though it was requested. But that's the kind of authority you have when you have a king. And this is what the Lord is warning them in today's reading. Remember, if you get that king, then he's in charge. I mean, granted, the king needs to obey the Lord, but that doesn't happen too. And he's in charge. He is the authority. Do you really want that? We'll talk more tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed day. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation through the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.